A look at ways clothes, cars, and computers are made reveals different patterns of supply fragmentation. Supply chains for different industries are fragmenting in different ways. Clothes, cars, and computers are all being affected. Globalization is becoming regionalization. Analysis by MGI finds that the global value chains, GVCS, in 16 of 17 big industries it studied, have been contracting since the global financial crisis. Trade continued to grow in absolute terms from 2007 to 2017, but during the period, exports in those same value chains declined from 28.1% to 22.5% of gross output. The biggest declines in trade intensity were observed in most heavily traded and complex GVCS, such as those in clothing, cars, and electronics. As MGI's Susan Lund explains, more production is happening in proximity to major consumer markets. China's role as the world's workshop is starting to fade. But surprisingly, this may not sound like death knell for mainland manufacturing. Thanks to its skilled labor force and excellent infrastructure, China remains an outstanding place to make things. Hence, its continued strength in numerous sectors. Also, the rise of the Chinese middle class has led many firms to redirect production to serve the local market. So MNCs are clearly rethinking the old linear sourcing model for Western markets, but the path forward is unclear. Different industries will make different choices. Corporate supply chain data are often opaque, and official trade statistics typically lag by years. Yet, talking to many firms in three industries reveals different patterns of fragmentation. The clothing sector is globally footloose. The car industry is coalescing around the regional hubs, and the electronics businesses remain rooted in China. Though Mr. Trump's attack on Huawei, his technology champion, will affect this. Big parts of the clothing and footwear business involves labor-intensive tasks such as stitching, so cost-conscious bosses are always chasing low-cost markets. Many long ago left the mainland where wages have soared for Southeast Asia and Bangladesh. Nike and Adidas make more training shoes in Vietnam than China. Today's hotspot is Ethiopia, which has attracted investment by Calvin Klein and H&M. With a labor cost of just $26 a month, it might seem a dream destination for the frugal clothier, but a report released in May by the NYU Stern Center for Business and Human Rights argues that these wages are too low to meet workers' basic needs, which is fueling unrest. Productivity levels are low and attrition high. Paul Walsh of the New Times Group, a clothing supply chain firm, observes, "We've run out of magic countries. Clothing bosses are increasingly preoccupied with speed more than cost," says a supply chain expert based in Asia. In speed, China still has the edge, he says, pointing to its world-beating online retailers, social commerce innovators, and nimble manufacturers. He thinks that demanding local consumers force Chinese clothing factories to remain enterprising and flexible. In contrast, factory bosses elsewhere complain of unreliability and low productivity. Unlike those cut-rate competitors, say experts, Chinese factories have the specialized machinery and experienced operators that are needed to make seamless fabrics and other higher value textiles. Pravin of Hagar, a leading manufacturer of men's trousers, has no plans to abandon China's highly automated fabric mills, which he finds very competitive. He adds that compliance with the child labor laws is strong in China, which cannot always be said about other markets. China's share in big clothes importing markets such as Japan and Europe has declined since 2010, as they have been buying cheaper clothes made in Southeast Asia instead. However, China's share in every big textile import market in Asia has soared because many of those workshops still bought fabrics from the mainland. Its export share into Vietnam, for example, more than doubled to 50% from 2005 to 2017. The upshot is that although China's once dominant role in this industry has diminished, it remains strong in important niches. As for the automobile industry, its supply chains have both local and global dimensions. Except for the jack in the trunk, which everybody gets from China, we've had a distributed global supply chain for a long time, says Hua, Ford's top supply chain executive. He sees a trend towards greater regionalization, coming with three hub and spoke networks. Mexico as the low-cost spoke for America, Eastern Europe, and Morocco for Western Europe, and South Asia and China for Asia. One reason for regionalization is that the American market is diverging from global trends, argues Christine of America's Center for Automotive Research, an industry research outfit. The Trump administration has rejected carbon regulation and rolled back Obama-era rules, promoting more fuel-efficient vehicles. Americans are increasingly favoring pickup trucks and sports utility vehicles, gas guzzlers, eschewed by much of the rest of the world. This has big implications. Ford has decided to phase out saloons altogether in the home market, for example, while GM has left Europe and is consolidating its North American operations. Goodnight, Shanghai. Car firms have invested heavily to turn Mexico into an export base. The value of its automobile exports has more than doubled since 2010, approaching $50 billion last year. The main reasons are not the nearly defunct North American Free Trade Agreement or lower labor costs, but rather Mexico's 4 dozen free trade agreements with other countries, which allow it to export to almost half the world's market for new cars tariff-free. Carmakers have rejigged supply lines to take advantage. Mexico's car exports to Germany have nearly 40% German components by value, while those crossing its northern border have over 70% American content. Mr. Trump's tariffs on China have pushed the big auto's supply chains to become even more regional. We are finally ready to leave China, says a senior supply chain executive at a global car market. His firm is looking seriously at shifting its sourcing for the global market from China to India, but finds Indian vendors unreliable. It thought about dividing between India and Mexico, but saw that its supply base will lose economies of scale. The winner will be Mexico, he says. A longer-term force that could turn automotive supply chains upside down is electrification. The Edison Electric Institute, a think tank, estimates that the share of electric vehicles, EVs, in new car sales in America will rise from 2% in 2018 to over 20% in 2030. That could reduce trade-in parts dramatically, since EVs have many fewer moving parts than conventional cars. Ford calculates that a shift to electric would reduce the value added by branded car manufacturers from 30% to 10%. Dyson, a British engineering firm, is now redesigning and manufacturing its new EVs in Singapore to be close to China. This is not just because the mainland is the biggest market for such vehicles, it is also the beating heart of global electronics productions. Innovation Nation. Half the world's electronic manufacturing capacity is based on the mainland. Its strengths go beyond sheer scale to diversity and sophistication of the products. The pace of hardware innovation in China's Pearl River Delta is unmatched, even in Silicon Valley. So too is its unique blend of scale and agility. This is why most of the world's technology giants make their kit in China. Rising costs led some electronics firms to consider moving out a few years ago. Most notably, Samsung has built a huge smartphone manufacturing complex in Vietnam. Now the political risks associated with the sourcing from China, especially the Huawei crackdown, are causing others to consider leaving. GoPro, which makes rugged digital cameras, is shifting much of its production to Mexico. Stanley Black & Decker, a big tool maker, is moving production of its Craftsman brand of tools back to America. Sweden's Ericsson is scaling up American manufacturing in anticipation of a boom in 5G telecoms equipment sales. Many firms are discovering that leaving China is not so easy. John Kern is the head of the supply chains in America's Cisco, a telecoms equipment company. Because of the concerns of customers in America and India who want non-China sourcing, it has upgraded its Mexican operations. But it still has many global customers without such concerns. He says China is a big manufacturing base for Cisco and will remain so for many years to come. George Yeo of Carrier Logistics, which has lorries and men all over Asia, has noticed an uptick in clients. Uptick. Intake. Uptick. Investing in Southeast Asia. Vietnam and Cambodia are the biggest beneficiaries, he reports, but labor productivity is a big problem across the region, and infrastructure can be ropey. Much of the investment he sees is going to labor-intensive industries like textiles. In electronics, Mr. Yeo thinks the exodus is limited to low-end kit. Thanks to automation and high value add, Shenzhen is still king. Scrutiny of these three sectors suggests a massive path forward from globalization. Making this challenge even more acute, MNC bosses are now faced with a double threat. Not only must they make supply chains shorter, they must make them faster.